The horizon burned red with the promise of another scorching day as Lydia Parker cracked the reins of her wagon, her heart as heavy as the trunks packed with her father's belongings. She had sworn to herself she wouldn't cry again, not after 3 days of tears that had left her throat raw and her eyes puffy. Papa was gone, and all that remained was this final journey to deliver his remains to his brother in Montana Territory, along with what little he had left behind in this world, Colorado Territory, 1873. The frontier had been both cruel and kind to the Parker family. Kind enough to give them hope, cruel enough to snatch it away with unforgiving swiftness. Lydia had buried her mother 5 years ago to consumption. Now, at 22, she found herself completely alone, save for an uncle she barely remembered meeting as a child. She adjusted her worn leather gloves and squinted at the trail ahead. The terrain was becoming increasingly difficult as she approached the mountain pass that would take her north. Her 2 horses, Birch and Maple, were sturdy animals, but even they struggled against the steep grade. "Just a little further, then we'll rest," she promised them, though her own weariness made the words sound hollow. The wagon jolted over a rock, causing Lydia to grip the seat tighter. She hadn't expected to make this journey alone. Her father's friend was supposed to accompany her, but a broken leg had confined him to bed. With winter approaching and the need to reach Montana before the mountain passes became impassable, Lydia had made the difficult decision to travel alone. The path narrowed as she climbed higher, hugging the mountainside with a sheer drop to her right that made her stomach flutter uncomfortably. She kept her eyes fixed on the trail, refusing to look at the yawning emptiness beside her. She hadn't realized the path would be this treacherous. No wonder the locals in the last town had looked at her with such concern when she mentioned her route. A loose stone skittered under the wagon wheel, followed by the alarming sound of dirt and rocks giving way. The wagon lurched sideways. "Whoa, steady!" Lydia called to the horses, pulling on the reins. But it was too late. The right wheel had slipped over the edge, and she felt the sickening sensation of the entire wagon beginning to tip. She scrambled to grab her father's pocket watch from the seat beside her, the only personal item she'd kept within reach. But as she clutched it, the wagon tilted further. Lydia screamed as the vehicle began its inevitable descent toward the ravine below. The horses whinnied in panic, their hooves scrabbling for purchase on the crumbling path. In that moment of suspended terror, a shout cut through the air. "Jump, now!" She barely registered the deep voice, or the thundering of hooves before a strong arm caught her around the waist, yanking her from the wagon's seat just as it tipped completely over the edge. She found herself pulled against a solid chest, the pocket watch still clutched in her hand, as the sickening crash of her wagon echoed from the ravine below. The horses, thankfully, had broken free of their harnesses and stood trembling on the path, but everything else, her father's remains, all his belongings, her own meager possessions, had vanished over the cliff. "I've got you," the voice said, steadier now. "You're safe." Lydia couldn't speak. Her entire body shook uncontrollably, and she clutched at the stranger's shirt, fearing that if she let go, she too would plummet to the rocks below. She was vaguely aware of being guided off the horse, of the man dismounting behind her, but the roaring in her ears drowned out everything else. "Just breathe," he said, and his arms remained around her, solid and secure. "That's it. You're all right now." When she could finally bring herself to look up, she found herself staring into eyes the color of a summer storm gray with hints of blue. They belonged to a face weathered by sun and wind, with several days' worth of stubble covering a strong jaw. A cowboy, by the look of his attire, dusty from the trail but well-maintained. "My father," she managed to choke out. His remains, everything. It's all gone." The man's expression softened with understanding. "I'm Samuel Vance," he said quietly, still holding her steady as the trembling in her limbs began to subside. "And I promise you, madam, we'll figure this out together." Lydia clutched her father's pocket watch tighter, the metal warm against her palm. It was all she had left now. "Lydia Parker," she whispered, her voice breaking. I don't know what to do." Samuel Vance kept one strong arm around her shoulders as he guided her further from the edge of the path. "First, we get somewhere safe, then we'll make a plan." He studied her face carefully. "Are you hurt anywhere?" Lydia took inventory of herself, surprised to find nothing more than a few bruises forming where his arm had caught her. "No, I don't think so." "Good." He nodded, then glanced at the two horses that had escaped the wagon. "We can use your horses. My camp's not far. You can rest there while we figure out our next steps." Lydia stared blankly at the edge where her wagon had disappeared. Everything she owned, everything she had left of her father's life gone in an instant. If not for this stranger, she would have gone over too. "Thank you," she said, the words entirely inadequate for what he'd done. "If you hadn't been here." Samuel shook his head, "But I was." He gently took her elbow, guiding her toward the horses. "Can you ride? We'll have to double up on my horse and I'll lead yours." Lydia nodded, suddenly feeling numb. The initial shock was wearing off, leaving a hollow feeling in its wake. She allowed him to help her onto his horse, a sturdy chestnut gelding with a white star on its forehead. Samuel mounted behind her, his presence solid and reassuring at her back. "It's about an hour's ride to my camp," he explained, gathering the reins of her two horses with one hand. "I've got coffee and food, and then we'll sort out what to do next." As they rode away from the site of her near death, Lydia couldn't help but wonder what twist of fate had placed Samuel Vance on this remote mountain trail at the exact moment she needed him. The pocket watch in her hand seemed to pulse with her heartbeat, the only connection remaining to the life she'd just lost. Samuel's camp turned out to be a small clearing beside a mountain stream, sheltered by pines and equipped with the basics of frontier living. A small tent was pitched to one side, while a stone-ringed fire pit dominated the center of the space. Various supplies were neatly arranged, suggesting this was a man accustomed to living on the trail. He helped her down from the horse with gentle hands that belied their strength, then immediately set about reviving the banked coals of his morning fire. "Please sit," he offered, gesturing to a log that had been positioned as a makeshift bench. "I'll have coffee ready in a few minutes." Lydia sank down, still clutching her father's watch. The reality of her situation was beginning to fully dawn on her. She had no supplies, no money beyond the few coins in her pocket, and no way to transport her father's remains, which were now lost somewhere in the ravine below. "I never asked what brought you to this trail," she said, her voice still shaky as she watched him work. Samuel glanced up from the fire. "I'm heading to Bonanza. Got some business with the mining company there." "Bonanza?" Lydia frowned. "In Colorado," he nodded. "About 2 days' ride north of here." "Where were you headed?" "Montana Territory. My uncle's place near Helena." She swallowed hard. "My father died 2 weeks ago. I was taking his remains to be buried on my uncle's land, along with what was left of our belongings." Samuel's hand stilled for a moment as he processed this. "I'm sorry for your loss, Miss Parker." "Thank you." She twisted the watch chain between her fingers. "This is all I have left of him now." Samuel placed the coffee pot on the fire and came to sit beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "If you'll allow it, I'd like to help. We can ride to Bonanza together, get you set up with new supplies, maybe even send a telegram to your uncle." "Why would you do that?" Lydia asked, studying his face for any sign of ulterior motives. Life had taught her to be wary of unexpected kindness. "Because it's the right thing to do," he answered simply. "And because no one should face that kind of loss alone." There was something in his expression, a shadow of old pain that made Lydia believe him. She nodded slowly. "I'd be grateful for the help, Mr. Vance. Though I have very little money to repay you, I'm not asking for payment." He stood and checked the coffee. "And it's just Samuel, or Sam if you prefer." "Then I'm just Lydia." As Samuel poured coffee into 2 tin cups, Lydia found herself studying him more carefully. He moved with the fluid confidence of a man accustomed to taking care of himself in the wilderness. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, his gun belt well-maintained. There was nothing flashy about him, nothing that screamed danger, yet she sensed a quiet strength that went beyond the physical. He handed her a cup. "It's strong, but it'll help with the shock." The coffee was indeed strong, but the warmth spreading through her hands and then her body was welcome. They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the crackling fire and the gentle rustling of leaves overhead. "Tomorrow we'll head to Bonanza," Samuel said finally. "Tonight you can use my tent. I'll sleep by the fire." "I couldn't possibly. You've had a shock," he interrupted gently. "You need proper rest. I've slept under the stars more nights than I can count." Lydia wanted to argue further but found herself too exhausted to do so. The events of the day had drained her completely, and the coffee was doing little to combat the weariness seeping into her bones. "Thank you," she said simply. Then, unable to stop herself, "Why were you on that trail today? It seemed so remote." Samuel took a sip of his coffee before answering. "It's a shortcut, I know. Saves half a day compared to the main route." He paused. "I wasn't supposed to leave until tomorrow, but something told me to start early." He shook his head, a small smile touching his lips. Never been one to ignore such feelings. "Then I'm grateful for your intuition," Lydia said softly. As night fell, Samuel prepared a simple meal of beans, jerky, and hardtack. It wasn't much, but to Lydia's surprise, she found herself ravenous. They ate mostly in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. After dinner, Samuel showed her to the tent, providing her with his own bedroll and spare blanket. Despite her exhaustion, sleep proved elusive as Lydia lay there, listening to the night sounds of the wilderness and the occasional shifting of Samuel by the fire. Her mind kept returning to the image of her wagon tipping over the edge, to the sickening moment of freefall before Samuel's arm had caught her. She clutched her father's watch tighter and finally allowed herself to cry for her father, for all she had lost, and for the strange twist of fate that had placed a good man in her path when she needed him most. Morning came with the cheerful chorus of birds and the smell of coffee once again wafting through the air. Lydia emerged from the tent to find Samuel already up, tending the fire and preparing a breakfast of fried salt pork and biscuits. "You're up early," he commented, glancing up with a small smile that transformed his weathered face. "I'm used to early mornings," Lydia replied, smoothing down her rumpled dress as best she could. "On our homestead, there was always work to be done before first light." Samuel nodded in understanding. "Where was your homestead?" "Near Denver," she said, accepting the cup of coffee he offered. "My father was a carpenter by trade. He built our cabin himself and took work building homes and furniture for others." A lump formed in her throat. "After my mother passed, the place never felt the same to him. He started talking about Montana, about joining my uncle at his ranch. And then he passed before making the journey," Samuel finished softly. Lydia nodded. "A heart attack. It was quick, the doctor said." She took a sip of coffee to steady herself. "I wrote to my uncle and he asked me to bring father's remains to Montana, said there was a place for me there too if I wanted it." Samuel added more wood to the fire. "And do you want it, I mean?" "I don't know what else I would do," she admitted. I sold the homestead to pay Father's debts. There's nothing left for me in Denver." "Well," Samuel said, handing her a plate of food, "first things first. We get to Bonanza, send a telegram to your uncle explaining what happened, and get you outfitted for the journey ahead." After breakfast, they packed up the camp efficiently. Samuel was organized and thorough, each item having its proper place in his saddlebags or bedroll. Lydia helped where she could, though she felt somewhat useless without her own belongings to manage. "We'll ride double again today," Samuel explained as he saddled the horses. "Tomorrow in Bonanza, we'll see about getting you your own saddle." The journey to Bonanza took them through stunning mountain scenery, vast forests of pine and aspen, meadows bursting with late summer wildflowers, and crystal-clear streams cutting through the landscape. Under different circumstances, Lydia might have found it beautiful, but her mind was too preoccupied with worry about her future. "Tell me about your business in Bonanza," she said as they rode, partly to distract herself and partly because she was genuinely curious about this man who had saved her life. Samuel was quiet for a moment. "I'm a surveyor," he finally said. "The mining company hired me to assess some new claims they're considering purchasing." "That sounds interesting work." "It can be," he agreed. "Takes me all over the territory, which suits me fine. Never been one to put down roots. No family waiting somewhere." Lydia asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. "I'm sorry that was forward of me." "No need to apologize," Samuel said, his voice even. "And no family. Lost my parents young, bounced between relatives until I was old enough to make my own way." He adjusted the reins slightly. "What about you? Besides your uncle in Montana, is there anyone else?" Lydia shook her head, though he couldn't see the gesture from his position behind her. "No, it was just my parents and me. My mother had no siblings and my father just the one brother." She sighed. "I've never even met any of my grandparents. They all passed before I was born or when I was too young to remember." "Then we have that in common," Samuel observed. "Making our own way in the world." They stopped at midday to rest the horses and eat a simple lunch of jerky and dried fruit. As they sat on a fallen log beside a bubbling stream, Lydia found herself studying Samuel's profile. In the dappled sunlight filtering through the trees, she noticed flecks of gold in his gray-blue eyes, and the way his dark hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck. There was a quietness to him that she found comforting. He didn't feel the need to fill every silence with words. "How did you become a surveyor?" she asked. Samuel took a drink from his canteen before answering. "I was good with numbers and maps as a boy. After the war, I took work with the railroad, learned the trade from an old surveyor who needed an assistant." A faint smile crossed his face. "Turned out I had a knack for it, and I liked the freedom of moving from job to job." "The war," Lydia echoed. "You fought," he nodded once. "Union cavalry." "Enlisted at 18, came home at 21 feeling a lifetime older." His expression closed slightly, and Lydia understood he didn't wish to speak further about those years. "My father wanted to enlist," she said, changing the subject slightly, "but my mother was ill even then. He stayed to care for us." "He made the right choice," Samuel said with conviction. "Family should come first." They resumed their journey shortly after, and by late afternoon, the first signs of civilization began to appear: cleared land, the occasional cabin set back from the trail, and finally, well-worn wagon tracks indicating a more frequently traveled road. "We're about an hour from Bonanza," Samuel informed her. "We should make it before sundown." True to his word, they crested a ridge just as the sun was beginning its descent, revealing the town of Bonanza spread out in the valley below. It was larger than Lydia had expected, a proper town, rather than just a mining camp, with several streets of wooden buildings, a church steeple rising prominently near the center, and the telltale industrial structures of mining operations on the outskirts. "It's grown since I was last here," Samuel commented. "The silver strike 2 years ago brought in a lot of new blood." As they rode down into town, Lydia became acutely aware of her disheveled appearance. Her dress was wrinkled and dirty from the accident and subsequent travel, her hair hastily pinned up that morning without the benefit of a proper brush. She must look a fright to anyone who saw her. Samuel seemed to sense her discomfort. "We'll go straight to the hotel," he said. "Get you settled in a room where you can rest and freshen up. The mercantile will be closed now anyway, but we can visit first thing tomorrow." The Grand Hotel was the largest building on Bonanza's Main Street, 3 stories of painted clapboard with a wide front porch and large windows. It wasn't truly grand by city standards, Lydia thought, but for a mining town in the Colorado mountains, it was impressive enough. Samuel helped her down from the horse, then led the animals to the nearby hitching post. "Wait here," he said. "I'll arrange for rooms." Lydia stood awkwardly on the sidewalk, aware of curious glances from passers-by. She must be quite a sight, a disheveled woman in a travel-stained dress, without baggage, standing outside the town's finest establishment. Samuel returned quickly. "Got you a room," he said. "Mine's just down the hall. The hotel has a dining room, but if you prefer, I can have something sent up." "I think I would prefer to eat in my room tonight," Lydia admitted, feeling overwhelmed at the thought of facing strangers in her current state. He nodded understandingly. "I'll see to it. Let's get you settled." The room was simple but clean: a bed with a patchwork quilt, a washstand with pitcher and basin, a small writing desk with chair, and a wardrobe. To Lydia, after days on the trail and a night in a tent, it looked like luxury itself. "The hotel proprietor's wife is about your size," Samuel said from the doorway, respectfully not entering the room. "She's offered to loan you a nightgown and a dress for tomorrow, until we can visit the mercantile." Lydia felt tears prick her eyes at this unexpected kindness. "That's very generous of her. People help each other out here," Samuel said with a shrug. "She'll bring them by shortly, along with some hot water for washing up." He shifted slightly, seeming almost uncomfortable. "I'll order dinner for both of us. Is there anything in particular you'd like?" Lydia shook her head. "Anything will be fine. I'm not particular." "All right then. I'll be in room 204 if you need anything. Dinner should arrive in about an hour." After he left, Lydia sank onto the bed, suddenly feeling the full weight of exhaustion from the past 2 days. If Samuel hadn't been there on that mountain trail, she shuddered, unable to complete the thought. She owed him her life, and he was continuing to look after her well-being with such quiet consideration. The hotel proprietor's wife, a friendly woman named Mrs. Holloway, arrived soon after with the promised clothing and hot water. She clucked sympathetically when Lydia briefly explained her situation. "You poor dear. What a terrible ordeal. Thank the Lord that Mr. Vance was there to help you." She laid out the borrowed clothing on the bed, a modest nightgown of soft flannel and a blue calico day dress. "These should fit well enough until you can get your own things, and don't you worry about a thing. Bonanza takes care of its visitors." After Mrs. Holloway left, Lydia gratefully washed away the dust and grime of travel. The borrowed nightgown was slightly large but clean and comfortable. She had just finished combing through her hair with her fingers when a knock at the door announced the arrival of dinner. Samuel had ordered generously a hearty stew, fresh bread, apple pie, and a pot of tea. The hotel staff had set it up on the small table by the window, and the delicious aromas made Lydia's stomach growl appreciatively. "This looks wonderful," she said, genuinely touched by his thoughtfulness. You need a proper meal after what you've been through, Samuel replied, still standing in the doorway. I'll leave you to enjoy it in peace. Tomorrow morning we can meet in the hotel dining room at 8 if that suits you. Yes, that would be fine. And Samuel, she called as he turned to go. Thank you for everything. He gave her a small smile that reached his eyes, transforming his weather-beaten face. Get some rest, Lydia. Things will look brighter in the morning. Alone with her dinner, Lydia found herself reflecting on the strange turn her life had taken. Just 2 days ago, she had been making the lonely journey to Montana, carrying the weight of her father's death and an uncertain future. Now here she was in Bonanza, Colorado, owing her life to a quiet, kind-hearted surveyor who seemed determined to see her safely on her way. For the first time since her father's death, Lydia felt a small spark of hope. Whatever happened next, she was no longer completely alone. Lydia woke the next morning feeling more rested than she had in weeks. The comfortable bed and sense of security had allowed her a deep, dreamless sleep. Sunlight streamed through the window, and for a moment, she simply lay there, savoring the warmth and comfort. Reality returned quickly enough. She had lost everything in the wagon accident: her father's remains, all her possessions, her means of transportation. But she was alive, thanks to Samuel Vance, and now had the chance to start again. She dressed in the borrowed blue calico, which fit reasonably well if a little loose at the waist. Mrs. Holloway had also provided a simple wooden comb, allowing Lydia to properly arrange her chestnut hair for the first time since the accident. Looking in the small mirror above the washstand, she was pleased to see that some color had returned to her cheeks, and the haunted look in her eyes had diminished somewhat. At precisely 8 o'clock, she made her way downstairs to the dining room. Samuel was already there, seated at a table near the window, his expression brightening visibly when he saw her. He stood as she approached, pulling out her chair with old-fashioned courtesy. "Good morning," he greeted her. "You look much better today." "I feel better," she admitted, settling into her seat. "A proper night's sleep works wonders." "I've taken the liberty of ordering for both of us," he said. "I hope you don't mind." "Not at all," Lydia assured him. She looked around the dining room, noticing several other guests, mostly men in business attire, likely connected to the mining operations. "Have you made plans for today?" Samuel nodded. "I need to meet with the mining company representatives this morning, but it shouldn't take more than an hour or two. I thought we might visit the mercantile afterward to get you outfitted, and then the telegraph office to send word to your uncle." "That sounds perfect," Lydia agreed. "I feel terrible imposing on your time like this." "It's no imposition," Samuel said firmly. "My work here will take several days at least, so there's no rush." Their breakfast arrived: fluffy scrambled eggs, crisp bacon, biscuits with honey, and strong coffee. Lydia hadn't realized how hungry she was until the food was before her, and she ate with healthy appetite. "I've been thinking," Samuel said as they finished their meal. "We need to be practical about your situation." Lydia set down her coffee cup. "What do you mean?" "Your wagon and everything in it is gone," he said gently, "including your father's remains. I know you were taking him to Montana for burial, but under the circumstances. We can't recover him from the ravine," Lydia finished, her throat tight with renewed grief. "I know. I've been thinking about it too." Samuel's expression was compassionate. "Perhaps we could arrange a memorial service here in Bonanza before you continue your journey, so you can say a proper goodbye, even without," he hesitated. "Without his body," Lydia said softly. "Yes, I think that would be appropriate. Father wasn't a particularly religious man, but he did believe in honoring traditions. The church here has a good pastor, from what I remember," Samuel offered. "We could speak with him today if you like." "Thank you," Lydia said, genuinely touched by his consideration. "That would mean a great deal to me." After breakfast, they parted temporarily, Samuel to his meeting with the mining company, and Lydia to write a letter to her uncle explaining what had happened. She used the hotel's stationery and sat at the small desk in her room, carefully detailing the accident, her rescue by Samuel, and her changed circumstances. It was painful to write about losing her father's remains, but she knew her uncle would understand the impossibility of retrieving them from the ravine. She concluded the letter with her plans to stay in Bonanza for a few days before continuing to Montana, and her hope that her uncle would still welcome her despite arriving without her father's remains. After sealing the letter, she went downstairs to the hotel lobby to wait for Samuel's return. He appeared just before 11, looking satisfied with the outcome of his meeting. "Ready to see the town?" he asked with a small smile. Bonanza's main street was bustling with activity, miners coming off their night shift, merchants opening their shops, women going about their shopping, and children running errands or playing games in the side streets. The town had the energetic feel of a place in its prime, growing and prosperous. Their first stop was the Mercantile, an impressive establishment that occupied a large corner building. Inside, the shelves were stocked with everything from basic necessities to luxury items brought in by Wagon from Denver. "Mrs. Parker needs to replace everything lost in a wagon accident," Samuel explained to the proprietor, a jovial man named Mr. Jenkins. "Clothing, personal items, the works." Mr. Jenkins expressed appropriate sympathy for Lydia's situation and called his wife from the back room to assist with the clothing selections. Mrs. Jenkins was a practical woman who quickly assessed Lydia's measurements and began pulling appropriate items from the shelves and display cases. "You'll need at least 2-day dresses," she declared. "A Sunday dress, night clothes, undergarments, stockings, a shawl for the cool evenings, and a proper coat for your journey north." She gave Lydia a motherly once-over. "And decent boots. Those you're wearing look like they've seen better days." While the women selected clothing, Samuel spoke quietly with Mr. Jenkins about other necessary supplies: toiletries, a small traveling trunk, and basic equipment for the journey to Montana. Lydia tried to keep track of the mounting cost, growing increasingly anxious about her limited funds. When they reached the counter with their selections, she pulled Samuel aside. "I can't afford all of this," she whispered urgently. "I only have $12 to my name." Samuel squeezed her arm reassuringly. "Consider it an advance. You can repay me when you're settled with your uncle." "But it's too much. I couldn't possibly, Lydia," he interrupted gently. "You need these things, and I can afford it. Please, let me help you." She wanted to argue further but saw the determination in his eyes. With a grateful nod, she accepted his generosity, promising herself she would find a way to repay him eventually. Their next stop was the telegraph office, where Lydia sent a condensed version of her letter to her uncle, informing him of the accident and her delayed arrival. The operator assured her that the message would reach Helena within a day, barring any problems with the lines. As they stepped back onto the street, Samuel checked his pocket watch. "It's nearly noon. Are you hungry?" "A little," Lydia admitted. "But I'd like to visit the church first, if we could." The Bonanza Community Church was a simple white structure with a modest steeple, set slightly apart from the commercial buildings of the town. They found the pastor, Reverend Williams, in his study, a kind-faced man in his 50s who listened sympathetically to Lydia's story. "I would be honored to conduct a memorial service for your father," he said when she finished. "Perhaps tomorrow afternoon. That would give us time to prepare and to spread word to the townsfolk." "Thank you, Reverend," Lydia said, relief evident in her voice. but I wouldn't expect the townspeople to attend. They didn't know my father." "In Bonanza, we support one another," Reverend Williams said firmly. "Even strangers passing through become part of our community in times of need. I assure you, there will be people here to stand with you." Samuel nodded appreciatively. "That's been my experience of this town as well." They discussed the details of the service. Lydia shared what little she knew of her father's favorite scriptures and hymns, and the pastor made thoughtful suggestions for the rest. By the time they left the church, Lydia felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. She couldn't give her father the burial he'd wanted, but she could at least honor his memory properly. "Are you all right?" Samuel asked as they walked back toward the main street. Lydia nodded, blinking back tears. "Yes, better than I expected, actually. It helps to have a plan." "Plans are good," he agreed, guiding her toward a small cafe. "Almost as good as lunch." The cafe was busy with the midday crowd, but they found a small table in the corner. Over bowls of hearty beef stew and fresh bread, Lydia found herself studying Samuel more closely. There was a steadiness to him that she found immensely comforting, a sense that he could weather any storm without panicking or faltering. "Tell me more about your surveying work," she prompted. "You mentioned the mining company, but what exactly will you be doing for them?" Samuel took a sip of coffee before answering. "They've purchased claims in the hills northwest of town. Before they invest in full-scale operations, they want an accurate survey of the terrain and potential yield." He broke off a piece of bread. "I'll be spending several days mapping the area, taking soil samples, assessing water sources, that sort of thing." "It sounds fascinating," Lydia said sincerely. "And useful." "It can be," he acknowledged with a small smile. "Though sometimes it just means getting very cold, very wet, or very lost in the pursuit of a straight line on a map." Lydia laughed, the first genuine laugh she'd managed since her father's death. The sound surprised her, and she quickly covered her mouth with her hand. "Don't," Samuel said softly. "It's good to hear you laugh." Their eyes met across the table, and something shifted in the air between them, a moment of connection that went beyond their circumstantial relationship. Lydia felt her cheeks warm and quickly looked down at her stew. "After lunch," Samuel continued, seemingly unaware of her sudden discomfort, "we should visit the livery stable. You'll need a horse for your journey to Montana." "I still have Birch and Maple," Lydia pointed out. "They survived the accident." "True, but they're draft horses, bred for pulling wagons, not for riding long distances." He finished his coffee. "We need to find you a good saddle horse with a smooth gait and enough stamina for mountain travel." The livery stable was at the edge of town, a large barn-like structure with adjoining corrals. The owner, a grizzled old-timer named Harlan Tucker, greeted Samuel like an old friend. "Vance, heard you were back in town." He pumped Samuel's hand enthusiastically. "Here to survey that new claim for Johnston and his partners." "That's right," Samuel confirmed. "But today I'm helping Miss Parker find a suitable mount. She needs a reliable horse for a journey to Montana Territory." Tucker turned his weathered face toward Lydia, assessing her with sharp eyes. "Montana's rough country, especially with winter coming on. You'll need something steady." He scratched his beard thoughtfully. "I might have just the animal." He led them to a corral where several horses were lazily grazing in the afternoon sun. Tucker whistled sharply, and a beautiful dun mare raised her head and trotted over. "This here's Penny," Tucker said with obvious pride. 7 years old, trail smart and gentle as they come, but with enough spirit to handle mountain paths. He ran a gnarled hand along the horse's neck. "She's got good wind and sure footing. Been using her for my own trail riding, but I'd sell her to the right owner." Lydia approached the mare cautiously, holding out her hand for the animal to sniff. Penny nudged her palm gently, dark eyes intelligent and calm. "She's beautiful," Lydia murmured, stroking the horse's velvety nose. "Want to try her out?" Tucker offered. "Got a saddle that would fit you just fine." At Lydia's nod, Tucker disappeared into the stable and returned with a well-maintained woman's saddle. With Samuel's help, they saddled Penny and adjusted the stirrups to Lydia's height. "It's been a while since I've ridden properly," Lydia admitted as Samuel helped her mount. "We always use the wagon at home. Penny will take care of you," Tucker assured her. "Just give her her head and feel how she moves." Lydia gathered the reins and nudged the mare forward. Penny responded immediately, moving out into the corral with a smooth, rolling gait that was easy to sit. After a few tentative circles, Lydia felt her confidence returning and she urged the horse into a gentle trot. Penny's movements remained fluid and predictable, her responsiveness to the slightest cue impressive. "What do you think?" Samuel called from the fence where he stood watching. Lydia couldn't help the smile that spread across her face. "She's perfect." The negotiation for Penny, a suitable saddle and necessary tack, took some time, but by mid-afternoon, Lydia was the proud owner of a horse that seemed almost too good to be true. Samuel had again fronted the money, adding it to the growing debt that Lydia silently vowed to repay as soon as possible. As they walked back toward the hotel, leading Penny to the stable behind it, Lydia found herself wondering about the next stage of her journey. The memorial service would be tomorrow, and after that, "When will you begin your surveying work?" she asked Samuel. "Day after tomorrow," he replied. "I've been gathering supplies and consulting maps while in town, but the actual fieldwork starts then." "I see." Lydia tried to keep her voice neutral. "I should probably plan to leave for Montana around the same time then." Samuel stopped walking, turning to face her directly. "Lydia, I don't think you should travel to Montana alone." She blinked in surprise. "I can't ask you to delay your work any further." "You've already done so much." "That's not what I'm suggesting," he interrupted. "My contract with the mining company will take at least 2 weeks to complete. Why don't you stay in Bonanza until then? I could escort you to Montana afterward." 2 weeks, Lydia echoed, "but winter is coming." "The mountain passes will still be passable in mid-October," Samuel finished. "I've made the journey to Helena before this time of year. It's challenging but doable if we're properly prepared." His expression grew serious. "After what happened on the trail, I'd rest easier knowing you weren't facing those mountains alone." Lydia felt a flutter in her chest at his concern. "I wouldn't want to be a burden." "You're not," he said firmly. "Besides, it would give you time to work through your grief properly instead of rushing from one trauma to the next." There was wisdom in his words, Lydia had to admit. The thought of staying in Bonanza for a while, in a real bed, with regular meals and time to process everything that had happened, was undeniably appealing. And the prospect of making the journey to Montana with Samuel at her side made the entire undertaking seem less daunting. "All right," she agreed softly. "If you're certain it won't interfere with your work." Relief visibly washed over his features. "I'm certain, and this way I'll know you're safe while I'm in the field." He resumed walking, leading Penny toward the hotel stable. "Besides, Bonanza is a friendly town. You might find you enjoy your stay here." That evening, they dined in the hotel's restaurant, the atmosphere between them more relaxed than before. Samuel shared stories of his surveying adventures, getting lost in a blizzard in Wyoming, encountering a mother bear with cubs in the Dakotas, spending 3 days trapped in a cabin during a flash flood in Utah. Lydia found herself laughing at his dry humor and marveling at the breadth of his experiences. In turn, she told him about growing up near Denver, about her mother's illness and her father's devotion during those difficult years, about the small joys and hardships of frontier life. Samuel listened attentively, asking questions that showed genuine interest rather than mere politeness. "Your father sounds like he was a good man," he commented as they finished their dessert apple pie with fresh cream. "He was," Lydia agreed, smiling at memories both bitter and sweet. "Stubborn as the day is long, but good-hearted. He taught me to read using the Bible and Shakespeare, the only books we owned for years. Said a person needs both divine guidance and human understanding to navigate this world properly." "Wise words," Samuel nodded appreciatively. As they parted for the night in the hotel hallway, an awkward moment hung between them, not unpleasant, but charged with unspoken awareness of their evolving relationship. They were no longer merely rescuer and rescued, but something more complex, hovering in the undefined space between strangers and friends. "Thank you again for everything today," Lydia said, breaking the silence. "The clothing, Penny, all of it. You're welcome." Samuel's voice was soft in the quiet hallway. "Sleep well, Lydia. Tomorrow will be emotional." "Yes," she agreed, grateful for his understanding. "Good night, Samuel. Good night." As she prepared for bed in her room, Lydia found herself thinking about the strange path that had brought her to this moment. If her wagon hadn't tipped over that cliff, if Samuel hadn't been on that trail at that exact moment, if he hadn't caught her as she fell. The sequence of events seemed too precisely arranged to be mere coincidence. Perhaps, she thought as she drifted toward sleep, her father was watching over her after all. The memorial service for Edward Parker was held at 3 o'clock the following afternoon. Lydia wore her new Sunday dress, a modest navy blue with lace at the collar and cuffs, and carried a small bouquet of wildflowers that Samuel had gathered for her that morning. To her surprise and deeply felt gratitude, the church was nearly half full. Reverend Williams had indeed spread the word, and the citizens of Bonanza had responded. Many were strangers coming simply to support a grieving daughter, but some had actually known Edward Parker from his carpentry work in the region years ago, before Lydia was born. "Your father built my first cabin," an elderly miner told her before the service. "Solid work that, still standing after 20 years of mountain winters. He made our dining table when we first came west," a woman in her 60s added. "Said it needed to be sturdy enough for children to dance on. He was right, it's held up through 5 children and now grandchildren." These unexpected connections to her father brought fresh tears to Lydia's eyes, but they were healing tears. Somehow, hearing these stories made her feel that a piece of him would live on in the mountains he had loved, even if his remains now rested in an unmarked ravine rather than her uncle's ranch. Samuel sat beside her throughout the service, a steady presence at her side. He didn't speak much, but his hand found hers during the most difficult moments, offering silent support that meant more than words could express. Reverend Williams led a service that was both dignified and warmly personal, weaving in the details Lydia had shared about her father and adding universal truths about life, death, and remembrance that resonated with everyone present. "Edward Parker was a builder," the Reverend said toward the end of his sermon. "He created homes and furniture that sheltered and supported families across this territory. His greatest creation, however, sits among us today, his daughter Lydia, whose courage in the face of loss reminds us that what we build in others endures long after our hands have stilled." After the service, the church ladies had arranged a small reception with coffee, tea, and cakes. Lydia found herself surrounded by well-wishers, each with a kind word or a comforting touch. The genuine compassion of these strangers moved her deeply. This was the frontier spirit at its best, the recognition that in this harsh and beautiful land, everyone needed neighbors, even if those neighbors were people you just met. As the reception wound down, Lydia stepped outside for a moment of quiet reflection. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the churchyard, and the mountains in the distance were touched with the golden light of approaching evening. She took a deep breath of the crisp mountain air, feeling somehow lighter than she had in weeks. "How are you holding up?" Samuel asked, joining her on the church steps. "Better than I expected," she admitted. "It feels right somehow, as if this is where Father's memorial was meant to be all along." Samuel nodded in understanding. "Sometimes the path we plan isn't the one we're meant to travel." "Like meeting you on that mountain trail?" Lydia asked, surprising herself with her boldness. Samuel's eyes met hers, something warm and undefined passing between them. "Yes," he said softly. "Exactly like that." The next morning brought a shift in their routine. Samuel needed to prepare for his surveying expedition, gathering supplies and consulting with his employers about specific requirements for the job. Lydia, meanwhile, found herself at loose ends in Bonanza, a town she hadn't planned to visit, but now would call home for at least 2 weeks. After breakfast, Samuel had suggested she might enjoy exploring the town further. "Bonanza has quite a good lending library at the schoolhouse," he mentioned. "And there's a women's auxiliary that meets at the church on Wednesdays. They might welcome a new face." "I think I'll take Penny for a ride this morning," Lydia decided. "Get to know her better before our journey." She paused, suddenly uncertain. "Unless you think that's unwise." "Not at all," Samuel assured her. "The area around town is safe enough. Just stay on the main trails and be back before dark." He hesitated, then added, "And maybe take this just in case." He handed her a small pistol, a Remington Derringer that fit neatly in her palm. "Do you know how to use it?" Lydia nodded. "My father taught me. We kept a rifle at the homestead." "Good. Hopefully you won't need it, but better to be prepared." They parted with plans to meet for dinner at the hotel that evening. Lydia changed into her riding outfit, a practical split skirt that Mrs. Jenkins had recommended, and headed to the stable where Penny greeted her with a soft whicker of recognition. Riding out of town on her new mare, Lydia felt a surprising sense of freedom. The past few weeks had been consumed by grief and obligation, with little room for simple pleasures. Now, with the crisp autumn air on her face and the rhythmic movement of the horse beneath her, she allowed herself to simply exist in the moment. She followed a well-marked trail that curved around the base of the mountains, offering spectacular views of the valley where Bonanza nestled. Penny proved to be everything Tucker had promised, sure-footed on the rocky path, responsive to the lightest touch of the reins, and seemingly tireless despite the elevation. About an hour's ride from town, Lydia came upon a small mountain lake, its surface reflecting the deep blue of the sky above. She dismounted, allowing Penny to drink from the clear water while she sat on a sun-warmed rock, enjoying the peaceful solitude. For the first time since her father's death, Lydia found herself thinking about her future without the weight of immediate crisis pressing down on her. What would life in Montana with her uncle be like? She barely knew the man, her father's younger brother, who had headed north years ago to raise cattle. Would she find a place there? Or would she always feel like an unwelcome obligation? And then there was Samuel. In just a few days, he had become important to her in ways she couldn't fully articulate. His quiet strength, his unwavering support, his thoughtful kindness, all had created a foundation of trust that felt remarkably solid for such a new relationship. The thought of parting ways after reaching Montana created an unexpected ache in her chest. "Don't be foolish," she murmured to herself. "He's just being kind to a woman in distress, nothing more." But even as she spoke the words, she knew they weren't entirely true. There had been moments glances held a beat too long, fingers brushing during the passing of a coffee cup, that charged silence in the hotel hallway that suggested something more than mere kindness. Shaking off these confusing thoughts, Lydia remounted Penny and headed back toward Bonanza. She had 2 weeks to sort through her feelings. For now, she would focus on each day as it came. The next morning, Samuel prepared to leave for his first day of surveying work. Lydia met him in the hotel dining room for an early breakfast, noticing the practical change in his attire: sturdy boots, canvas trousers, a flannel shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat that would offer protection from both sun and rain. "I'll be gone all day," he explained, sipping his coffee. "Possibly until after dark, depending on how much ground we cover." Lydia asked. "I have 2 assistants from the mining company, local men who know the terrain." He hesitated, then added, "Will you be all right on your own?" Lydia smiled reassuringly. "Of course. I thought I might visit the lending library today, maybe explore the shops a bit more." She didn't mention her plan to inquire about temporary work. The money Samuel had spent on her behalf weighed on her conscience, and she was determined to earn at least some of it back before they left for Montana. "Good," he nodded, seeming relieved. "The hotel restaurant serves dinner until 8. If I'm not back by then, I'll manage just fine," Lydia interrupted gently. "Don't worry about me, Samuel. Focus on your work." He studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Lydia Parker." The words warmed her unexpectedly. "Go survey your mountains, Mr. Vance. I'll see you when you return." After Samuel departed, Lydia set out to explore Bonanza more thoroughly. The lending library at the schoolhouse proved to be an unexpected treasure. 2 full shelves of books ranging from practical guides on homesteading to novels by Dickens, Austen, and the American writer Mark Twain. The schoolteacher, Miss Collins, was delighted to issue Lydia a temporary lending card. "It's so nice to meet someone else who values books," she confided. "Most of the mining men never set foot in here, and some of the town ladies only borrow the fashion magazines that come in from Denver." Lydia selected a novel she'd long wanted to read, Middlemarch by George Eliot, and promised to return soon. Her next stop was the Bonanza Gazette office, where she inquired about temporary employment. The editor, a harried-looking man named Silas Murphy, looked up from his printing press with skepticism. "Employment for a lady? Well, I don't know. I can write clearly," Lydia offered, "and I'm quite good with numbers. Perhaps you need assistance with subscriptions or advertisements." Murphy scratched his chin thoughtfully. "As a matter of fact, I've been falling behind on the account books. My assistant left for the Goldfields last month." He eyed her speculatively. "Can you keep a ledger straight, balance accounts?" "My father taught me," Lydia confirmed. "I managed all our household accounts after my mother passed." I can't pay much 50 cents a day for a few hours' work." "That would be fine," Lydia agreed, pleased with the unexpected opportunity. "Start tomorrow then, 9 o'clock sharp." With that settled, Lydia continued her exploration of Bonanza. The town was larger than it had first appeared, with several side streets branching off from the main thoroughfare. In addition to the businesses she'd already visited, there was a bakery, a dressmaker's shop, 2 saloons which Lydia passed with averted eyes, a doctor's office, a barber shop, and even a small photography studio. She stopped for lunch at the cafe where she and Samuel had eaten previously, then spent the afternoon reading in the hotel's comfortable lobby. The novel proved engrossing, and she was startled when the lobby clock chimed 6, reminding her it was time for dinner. Samuel didn't return that evening. Lydia ate alone in the hotel restaurant, trying not to worry about him out in the wilderness as darkness fell. She reminded herself that he was experienced in this work, that he had assistants with him who knew the area, that there was no reason to fret over a grown man doing the job he'd done for years. Still, she found herself lingering in the lobby later than necessary, pretending to read while actually watching the door. When the clock struck 10, and he still hadn't appeared, she finally retired to her room, telling herself that he had simply made camp in the mountains rather than returning to town in the dark. Sure enough, when she came down for breakfast the next morning, there was a note waiting for her at the front desk. Made camp in the field. Progress good but slow. Will return tomorrow evening. Hope your day was pleasant. SV. The brevity of the message made her smile. Samuel was a man of few words, but each one was carefully chosen. She tucked the note into her pocket and headed to the newspaper office for her first day of work. The next week fell into a pattern. Samuel would leave early in the morning for his surveying work, sometimes returning late at night, other times staying in the field for a day or two. When in town, he joined Lydia for meals, listening attentively as she told him about her days at the newspaper office, her explorations of Bonanza, and the books she was reading. In turn, he shared details of his work, the challenging terrain he was mapping, the promising signs of silver ore his employers were excited about, the beauty of the high mountain valleys few people ever saw. His descriptions were vivid enough that Lydia could almost see these remote places through his eyes. Gradually, Lydia found herself becoming part of the Bonanza community. Her work at the newspaper introduced her to the town's business owners. Her attendance at the women's auxiliary meeting connected her with the wives and mothers who were the backbone of frontier society. Her daily visits to the bakery for fresh bread led to a friendship with the baker's daughter, a cheerful young woman named Clara who shared Lydia's love of books. To her surprise, Lydia realized she was beginning to feel at home in this town she'd never planned to visit. The weight of grief still pressed on her heart, but it was no longer crushing. The memorial service had provided closure, and the daily routine of life in Bonanza gave her purpose. And then there was Samuel. With each conversation, each shared meal, each moment of quiet understanding between them, Lydia felt the connection deepening. She learned to read the subtle shifts in his expression, the slight crinkle at the corners of his eyes when he was amused, but trying not to show it, the barely perceptible tightening of his jaw when something troubled him, the way his entire face softened when he spoke of the natural beauty he encountered in his work. They never spoke directly of what might be growing between them. There was an unspoken agreement to focus on the present, on his surveying work, on her temporary job, on their eventual journey to Montana. But sometimes, in the quieter moments, Lydia would catch him watching her with an expression that made her heart beat faster. 10 days after her arrival in Bonanza, a response finally came from her uncle in Montana. The telegram was brief, but clear. Received news of accident. Stop. Glad you are safe. Stop. Welcome here. Whenever you arrive. Stop. Take your time coming north. Stop. Winter comes early to Montana. Stop. Uncle James. Lydia shared the message with Samuel over dinner that evening. It's a relief to know he still expects me, she admitted. Though I feel terrible about arriving without Father's remains. He understands it was beyond your control, Samuel reassured her. And he's right about taking your time. The weather can change quickly in these mountains, especially as October progresses. Lydia nodded, absently pushing food around her plate. How is your work coming along? Will you finish on schedule? Samuel took a sip of coffee before answering. Actually, that's what I wanted to discuss with you. The preliminary surveys are very promising, and the company wants more detailed work than originally planned. He met her eyes directly. They've asked me to extend my contract by another 2 weeks. Oh. Lydia tried to keep the disappointment from her voice. So you won't be able to accompany me to Montana. That's not what I'm saying, Samuel clarified quickly. I'm saying we might need to delay our departure a bit longer. He leaned forward slightly. Unless you're eager to leave Bonanza. I know this wasn't in your plans. Lydia considered his question carefully. Was she eager to leave? The truth was, she had come to enjoy her time in Bonanza, the work at the newspaper, the friends she was making, the rhythm of small-town life. And she had come to enjoy, even more, the time spent with Samuel. I'm not in a rush, she said finally. My uncle's telegram suggests he's not expecting me immediately, and I've found Bonanza to be a pleasant place to stay. She met his gaze. Mr. Murphy has even hinted that my position at the newspaper could become permanent if I were interested. Something flickered in Samuel's eyes, surprise, followed by what might have been pleasure. You're considering staying in Bonanza, beyond our departure for Montana. Lydia hadn't actually thought that far ahead until the words left her mouth, but as she considered it, the idea held appeal. Perhaps. I don't really know my uncle, after all, and here I've found work I enjoy, people who have been kind to me. She trailed off, not quite brave enough to include him explicitly in her reasons. Bonanza would be lucky to have you, Samuel said softly. And the newspaper job suits you. You have a precise mind. Thank you. Lydia felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. So we'll plan to leave in about 3 weeks, if that suits you, Samuel finished. Mid-October. The passes should still be manageable then, especially if we travel light and make good time. 3 more weeks in Bonanza, Lydia mused, a small smile playing at her lips. I think I can manage that quite happily. The following Sunday afternoon found them riding together in the hills outside town. The day was perfect for an outing, crisp autumn air, cloudless blue sky, and the aspen trees turning gold along the mountainsides. Samuel had suggested the ride, saying he wanted to show Lydia one of his favorite spots discovered during his surveying work. They followed a narrow trail that wound steadily upward, sometimes having to ride single file where the path narrowed. Samuel led the way on his chestnut gelding, occasionally pointing out landmarks or interesting features of the landscape. Lydia followed on Penny, who seemed to enjoy the outing as much as her rider. After about an hour, the trail opened onto a high meadow surrounded by pines. A small stream bubbled through the center, and wildflowers still bloomed in sheltered pockets, despite the advancing season. Beyond the meadow, the view was spectacular. The valley spread out below, Bonanza visible as a cluster of buildings beside the river, and mountains rising majestically in every direction. "Oh, Samuel," Lydia breathed as they reined in their horses. "It's beautiful." "I thought you'd appreciate it," he said, looking pleased at her reaction. "Not many people make the climb up here." They dismounted, leaving the horses to graze while they spread a blanket near the stream. Samuel unpacked a simple picnic from his saddlebags: bread, cheese, dried fruit, and a bottle of cider. As they ate, Lydia found herself studying Samuel more openly than she'd allowed herself before. The past 2 weeks had changed him subtly. The constant work outdoors had darkened his tan and added lean muscle to his already strong frame. But it was the ease in his manner that struck her most, a relaxed quality that hadn't been present when they first met. "What are you thinking?" he asked, catching her gaze. Lydia considered deflecting the question but decided on honesty instead. "That you seem different from the man who pulled me from that wagon, more at peace somehow." Samuel looked surprised, then thoughtful. "I suppose I am," he acknowledged. "This assignment has been good for me." "Bonanza has been good for me." His eyes met hers. "You have been good for me." The directness of his statement caught Lydia off guard. "Me? But I've been nothing but a complication to your work." Samuel shook his head, a small smile touching his lips. "Is that what you think?" He set aside his plate and shifted to face her more directly. "Lydia, before I met you, I was just drifting from job to job, place to place. I took pride in my work, but there was no anchor, nothing that mattered beyond the next survey, the next paycheck. And now?" Lydia asked softly, her heart beating faster. "Now I find myself thinking about what comes after this job," he admitted. "About whether Bonanza might be a good place to stay for more than just a few weeks. About whether a man who spent years avoiding roots might be ready to plant some." Lydia could scarcely breathe. "What are you saying, Samuel?" "I'm saying that pulling you from that wagon changed more than just your path." His voice was steady, but she could see the vulnerability in his eyes. "It changed mine too." "Samuel," Lydia began, but he gently raised a hand. "I'm not asking for anything right now," he assured her. "I know you're still grieving, still finding your way, and we have this journey to Montana ahead of us." He took a deep breath. "I just wanted you to know that, whatever you decide about staying in Bonanza or going to your uncle's, I'd like to remain in your life if you'll allow it." Tears pricked at Lydia's eyes, not tears of sadness, but of a complicated joy she hadn't expected to feel again so soon after her father's death. "I'd like that very much," she whispered. Samuel's smile then was like the sun breaking through clouds. He reached for her hand, entwining his fingers with hers in a gesture that felt both protective and reverential. They sat like that for several minutes, hands joined, gazing out at the spectacular view, each absorbed in thoughts of a future suddenly filled with new possibilities. The ride back to town was quiet but companionable, both of them processing the shift in their relationship. Nothing definite had been promised, but a door had been opened, and neither seemed inclined to close it. As October progressed, Lydia's life in Bonanza took on an increasingly permanent feel. Her work at the newspaper expanded from simply keeping the books to occasionally writing small pieces for publication, announcements of community events, reports on the women's auxiliary activities, even a weekly column of household tips that proved surprisingly popular with the miners' wives. She moved from the hotel to a small but comfortable room at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house, a more economical arrangement that allowed her to start setting aside money to repay Samuel and to build a small nest egg of her own. Her circle of acquaintances widened, and she found herself invited to social gatherings, quilting bees, and Sunday dinners with families eager to welcome a new face to their town. Through it all, her relationship with Samuel continued to deepen, though always with a certain restraint. They were both aware of her still fresh grief, of the journey to Montana still ahead of them, of the need to proceed carefully with hearts that had known loneliness and loss. Their moments together were precious: dinners at the hotel when he was in town, rides in the countryside on his days off, quiet conversations by the fire in Mrs. Holloway's parlor in the evenings. They never spoke directly of love, but it was there in the careful attention they paid to each other's needs, in the way Samuel's eyes sought hers across a crowded room, in the gentle touch of Lydia's hand on his arm when they walked together. As the scheduled date for their departure to Montana approached, Lydia found herself increasingly torn. Her uncle was expecting her, and she had given her word. But Bonanza had become home in a way she hadn't anticipated, and the thought of leaving, especially with no certainty of returning, caused an ache in her chest that grew stronger each day. The decision was made for her one crisp morning in mid-October, when she arrived at the newspaper office to find Mr. Murphy poring over a telegram with a troubled expression. "Bad news?" she asked, hanging up her shawl. "Weather report from up north," he replied, handing her the telegram. "Early blizzard hit the Montana highlands 2 days ago. Heavy snow in the passes already." Lydia read the message with growing concern. If the northern passes were already snow-bound, their journey would be dangerous at best, impossible at worst. "I should show this to Samuel," she murmured. "We're supposed to leave for Montana next week." Murphy raised his eyebrows. "Not with the passes closing, you're not. At least, not if you've got any sense. That'd be a death sentence, miss." The bell over the door jingled and Samuel himself walked in, his expression serious. "Lydia, have you heard about the storm up north?" She held up the telegram. "Just reading about it now." "I've had word from some freighters who came in late last night," Samuel said grimly. "They barely made it through before the snow hit. Said it's the earliest hard freeze they've seen in years." Murphy nodded sagely. "Weather like that, the passes won't open again until spring." Lydia felt a strange mixture of disappointment and relief wash over her. "So we can't go to Montana." "Not until spring," Samuel confirmed. "I'm sorry, Lydia. I know you were counting on reaching your uncle before winter." She studied his face, trying to gauge his feelings about this change in plans. "What will you do? Will the mining company extend your contract through the winter?" "Actually," Samuel said, glancing at Murphy, "I had a meeting with them this morning about exactly that. They're pleased with my work and want me to oversee the next phase of development, planning access roads, identifying building sites, that sort of thing." He paused. "It would mean staying in Bonanza until at least April." "I see," Lydia said, her pulse quickening at the implications. "And you're considering it?" "I am." His eyes held hers steadily. "But my decision depends partly on you." Murphy, sensing the private nature of the conversation, mumbled something about checking the printing press and disappeared into the back room. Once they were alone, Samuel stepped closer to Lydia. "I need to send a telegram to your uncle today, explaining that the passes are closed and you'll have to delay your journey until spring. The question is, what exactly should I tell him about your plans for the winter?" Lydia took a deep breath, suddenly certain of what she wanted. "Tell him I've found employment in Bonanza and have decided to stay here, at least until the passes open again." She met Samuel's gaze directly. "Tell him I've found a place where I belong." The smile that spread across Samuel's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Is that true, Lydia? Have you found where you belong?" "I believe I have," she said softly. "It wasn't where I expected to find it, but yes." He reached for her hand, holding it between both of his. "Then I'll accept the mining company's offer. And perhaps over the winter, we can explore what the future might hold for us. Together." "I'd like that very much," Lydia whispered, her heart full to bursting with a happiness she hadn't dared to hope for when she set out on her journey just weeks ago. That evening, they celebrated their decision to stay in Bonanza with dinner at the hotel restaurant. The atmosphere between them had changed subtly, the restraint of previous weeks giving way to a cautious joy. A shared acknowledgement of feelings that had grown steadily since that fateful day on the mountain trail. "I sent the telegram to your uncle this afternoon," Samuel told her as they finished their meal. "Explained about the weather and that you'd found a good position in Bonanza." "Thank you," Lydia said. "I'll write him a proper letter tomorrow with more details." Samuel nodded, then seemed to hesitate before continuing. "I've been thinking about housing arrangements for the winter. Mrs. Holloway's is fine for now, but with the mining company expanding operations, more workers will be arriving soon. Rooms will be scarce." Mr. Murphy mentioned the same concern, Lydia agreed. "Several families are taking in boarders to accommodate the influx. The company owns several cabins on the edge of town," Samuel explained. "They've offered me one as part of my new contract. It's small but solid, 2 rooms, a decent stove, close enough to town for convenience but with some privacy." He met her eyes directly. I thought perhaps, if you were willing, we might consider a more permanent arrangement before winter sets in. Lydia's breath caught in her throat. Samuel Vance, are you proposing marriage? A slow smile spread across his face. I suppose I am, though not as eloquently as you deserve. He reached across the table to take her hand. Lydia Parker, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I know it's sudden, and I would understand if you want more time, but Yes, Lydia interrupted, her heart so full she thought it might burst. Yes, I will marry you, Samuel. His expression transformed with joy and relief. Are you certain? I don't want you to feel rushed because of practical considerations like housing or Samuel, Lydia said firmly, squeezing his hand. I'm saying yes because of you, not because of practicalities. Because somewhere between the moment you pulled me from that wagon and now, I fell in love with you. I love you too, he said softly, the words clearly new to his lips but no less heartfelt for it. More than I thought possible. They were married 2 weeks later in the Bonanza Community Church, with Reverend Williams officiating. The entire town turned out for the occasion, Lydia in a simple but elegant white dress made by the local dressmaker, Samuel in a new suit ordered from Denver. Mrs. Holloway cried as if Lydia were her own daughter. Mr. Murphy beamed proudly from the front pew, and even old Harlan Tucker from the livery stable showed up in freshly polished boots, claiming credit for the match since he'd sold them penny. The cabin the mining company provided became their first home together, small but cozy, with a view of the mountains from the front porch. Samuel's surveying work kept him busy during the days, while Lydia continued her position at the newspaper, gradually taking on more writing responsibilities as Mr. Murphy recognized her talent. Winter in the Colorado mountains was as harsh as expected: deep snow, biting cold, and occasional blizzards that kept the town isolated for days at a time. But inside their cabin, Lydia and Samuel created a haven of warmth and happiness. They learned each other's habits and preferences, shared stories of their pasts, and made plans for their future. In late November, a letter arrived from Lydia's uncle in Montana, a thoughtful, detailed response to her earlier correspondence. He expressed genuine pleasure at her marriage and assured her that whenever she and Samuel chose to visit Montana, they would be welcome at his ranch. The letter lifted a weight from Lydia's shoulders. Her father's brother understood and approved of the path her life had taken. As Christmas approached, Bonanza transformed with decorations and festivities. The mining company hosted a grand party for the town, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed everyone twice over. Lydia, wearing a new green dress that Samuel had surprised her with, found herself reflecting on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought her to this moment. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Vance," Samuel murmured, coming up behind her with cups of punch. Lydia smiled at the name she was still getting used to. "I was just thinking about how different this Christmas is from what I expected when I left Denver." She accepted the punch gratefully. "If my wagon hadn't tipped over that cliff, if I hadn't decided to take the shortcut that day." Samuel continued, "If you hadn't caught me as I fell." Lydia added softly. Samuel set down his cup and drew her close, unconcerned with the public display of affection. "Sometimes the worst moments in our lives open doors to the best," he said, his voice low and intimate despite the bustling party around them. "I thank God every day that I was on that trail at that exact moment." "As do I," Lydia whispered, rising on tiptoe to place a gentle kiss on his lips. Winter gave way to spring, the snow gradually retreating up the mountainsides as April sunshine warmed the valley. The mining company's operations expanded, bringing prosperity to Bonanza and securing Samuel's position for the foreseeable future. Lydia, meanwhile, had been promoted to assistant editor at the newspaper, her natural writing talent flourishing under Mr. Murphy's guidance. On a warm day in early May, they rode together to the high meadow Samuel had shown her the previous autumn. The wildflowers were beginning to bloom, painting the landscape with splashes of color after the monochrome months of winter. They spread a blanket beside the stream, just as they had before, and unpacked the picnic Lydia had prepared. "The passes to Montana should be opening soon," Samuel remarked as they ate. "Will you want to make the journey to see your uncle this summer?" Lydia smiled, a secretive expression that caught his attention immediately. "What is it?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "I'm not sure a long journey would be wise, given my condition," she said, watching his face carefully. Samuel froze, a piece of bread halfway to his mouth. "Your condition? Are we going to have a baby?" Lydia finished for him, her smile widening. "Yes, according to Dr. Wilson. Sometime in November, he thinks." The bread fell forgotten as Samuel moved across the blanket to gather her in his arms. "A baby," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Our baby." "Are you pleased?" Lydia asked, though his reaction left little doubt. "Pleased doesn't begin to cover it," Samuel said, pulling back to look at her with eyes suspiciously bright. "I never thought I'd have a family of my own, first you and now a child." He shook his head in wonder. "Sometimes I still can't believe how much my life has changed since that day on the mountain." Lydia rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Do you ever regret it? Staying in one place, I mean. You were so used to moving from job to job." "Not for a single moment," Samuel assured her, his arms tightening around her. "Bonanza is home now because you're here, you and our child." He placed a gentle hand on her still flat abdomen. "Besides, there are plenty of mountains still to survey around here. I won't run out of new territory anytime soon." They stayed in the meadow until late afternoon, talking about the future, making plans for the baby, simply enjoying the beauty of the day and the miracle of their love. As they finally packed up to return to town, Lydia paused to take in the spectacular view one more time. "I never thanked you properly," she said suddenly. Samuel looked up from securing their picnic basket to the saddle. "For what?" "For holding me until the shaking stopped, that day on the mountain," Lydia explained. "I was so terrified and you just held me, made me feel safe when my whole world had just fallen away." Samuel crossed to her side, drawing her close once more. "I'll always be there to hold you, Lydia, through whatever life brings us." As they rode back down the trail toward Bonanza, toward home, Lydia reflected on the strange and wonderful journey that had brought her to this point. A wagon tipping over a cliff had seemed like the end of everything, but it had been only the beginning. In losing all she had found something far more precious. A love strong enough to build a life on, a foundation more secure than any her father had ever constructed. And as Samuel rode beside her, solid and steadfast as the mountains surrounding them, Lydia knew with absolute certainty that this was exactly where she was meant to be. 5 years later, on the anniversary of their first meeting, Samuel and Lydia Vance stood on the porch of their new home, a handsome 2-story house on the edge of Bonanza, with a view of the mountains where they had first encountered each other. The town had grown substantially, the silver mines continuing to yield rich ore and bringing prosperity to the entire valley. Samuel now headed the surveying department for the mining company, while Lydia had taken over as editor of the Bonanza Gazette when Mr. Murphy retired. Inside the house, their 4-year-old son, Edward, named for Lydia's father, was being supervised by Mrs. Holloway, who had become like a grandmother to the boy. Lydia's hand rested on her growing belly, where their second child, a daughter, they both somehow knew would arrive before winter. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd made it to Montana?" Samuel asked, his arm around her shoulders as they watched the sunset painting the mountains with gold and crimson. Lydia shook her head. "No, that path closed the moment my wagon went over that cliff." She turned in his arms to face him. "And I wouldn't change a thing about the path we've traveled instead." Samuel's eyes, still that same storm gray with hints of blue, softened as he gazed at her. 5 years of marriage had only deepened the connection between them. Each challenge and joy they'd faced together strengthening the bond that had formed in that moment of rescue on a mountain trail. "Nor would I," he murmured, bending to kiss her with the same tenderness he'd shown from the beginning. "Not one single step." As twilight settled over Bonanza, Samuel and Lydia Vance stood together on their porch, surrounded by the life they had built from the most unexpected of beginnings, a life founded on a moment of terror, transformed by love into the promise of forever.